During the Roman Republican period, if you were a young man coming from a senatorial family and you wanted to start your political career, you had to start small. If you were particularly ambitious, who knows, maybe you even wanted to become consul one day, you would have to go through the cursus honorum, a sequential series of public offices responsible for the administration of the city of Rome and the Republican territories at large. But before you would even be considered to become a questor, the lowest position in the cursus honorum, you had to serve the state. Military service was absolutely expected from every citizen, but as a patrician, you were expected to also acquire experience as a minor magistrate, getting your first taste for the public life, for the public administration. The most prestigious of these minor magistracies were the Vigintisexviri, a group of 26 young men starting their political careers. They were given a series of different administrative tasks. Among these 26, 3 of them were designated Tres Viri Aere Argento Auro Flando Ferundio, literally meaning the 3 men responsible for the minting of bronze, silver, and gold, or, for short, Triumviri Monetales. As the name suggests, they were responsible for overseeing the everyday operations of the Roman mint and the production of coins. But you see, these young, ambitious men quickly realized that this position was surprisingly influential, not because they held any strong direct power, but because they were responsible for making something that every Roman desperately tried to acquire: money. If you could find a way of passing your message, or doing some personal propaganda on your coins, they would be on the hands of every person in Rome, well, every person abroad as well. Your minor magistracy gave you a massive opportunity of letting everyone know you were a new name in politics. This resulted in a creative explosion of designs put on the silver denarii of the time. From the mid-2nd century BC to the end of the Republic at the very end of the 1st century BC, every year a new issue had a new design, and this is what gives such appeal to these little coins. Every single coin has a different story to tell. If you dig in the historical records of a particular moneyed, his political affiliations, and what was going on in Roman politics at the time, it will most likely be reflected on the coin design of that year. Really fascinating. So this is what we're exploring today. Let's look at some examples of propaganda made by the Triumviri Monetales on the coins struck during their magistracy. So let's start our little numismatic tour with an earlier piece. This is a denarius from 154 BC. Rome is establishing itself as a major power in the Mediterranean. Carthage has been beat twice now, and it will be soon wiped out by the Romans. The Macedonians have been defeated, and soon Rome will conquer the rest of the Greek world. In the Iberian Peninsula, the native Iberians rally together as Rome is starting to turn its gaze towards the central parts of the peninsula. The denarius is by that time very well established as one of the main coins, one of the main silver coins of the Mediterranean, and it hasn't changed much in design and in silver purity from its origins in 211 BC, so it's a pretty trustworthy coin. So in these classical types, let's say, we have on the obverse Dea Roma, the incarnation of the city of Rome, the most common deity depicted on these coins by far, and by far on Republican denarii at large. Originally, in fact, it was the only deity shown. We have here the beautiful face of this young woman wearing a winged helmet with her hair flowing down the back of her neck. This first design most likely draws some inspiration on the depictions of Athena put on Greek coins, I would say. Behind Roman's head, we have the Roman numeral for 10 asses, the base unit of the Roman monetary standard, which was a big, chunky bronze coin. The reverse of this piece is also reminiscent of the very first denarii ever made, with the same design of Castor and Pollux, the divine twins protector of Rome, riding their horses. 2 stars can be seen on top of them, representing their divinity. And on the lowest part of the design, inside some rectangular borders, we have Roma. Notice, however, that differently from the very earliest coins from the late 3rd century BC, which were completely anonymous, in this coin now, we start seeing the Triumviri Monetalis putting their abbreviations on the coins, a small hint of personality, of uniqueness in these pieces. Here we see the abbreviation of a certain Gaius Scribonius. That's one of the coolest things about these coins. By looking at the name in it, you find information about the moneyer and also about his entire family. I mean, for example, for this coin, it seems like this Gaius guy, he was moneyer in 154 BC, and either him or his dad had the position of Prefectus Socii, or a commander of troops from Rome's Italic allies, in 181 BC. So once more, like in the case of this guy, this Gaius Scribonius, if you look into the history of this Scribonia family, the gens Scribonia, you even find information about later members of Gaius' extended family. So, for example, some of his descendants even fought at the civil wars of the very late Republic. Think about Julius Caesar, Augustus, these people who lived a century or so after him. That gives these coins such a personal tone. They aren't just testimonies of the glory of an emperor like imperial coins. They're more like personal testimonies of the tales of a single family, sometimes of a single individual. They're truly the newspapers, the diaries of ancient Rome. So let's go forward in time. Let's go to the year 119 BC. And now we have a complete break with the traditional designs from the early denarii in favor of new, unique, innovative designs. So this piece was struck by Marcus Furius Philus, featuring this charming image of Janus, the god of the passage of time, with 2 faces, looking to the past and towards the future. The family of this moneyer, the gens Furia, was a very old and illustrious Roman family, dating to the earliest days of the Republic. Could the depiction of Janus here be a reference to this long lineage of statesmen? Maybe something akin to the gens Furia has served Rome since our distant past and will continue to do so in the future? I would say that's a reasonable explanation. Around the legends, we have the name of the moneyer abbreviated, Marcus Furi Luci Fili. Now let's check out this reverse. Very busy scene here. Instead of the old image of Roma riding a chariot from previous denarii, we have her standing, holding a laurel wreath, crowning a military trophy. Next to her, we have a bunch of shields, swords, armor, basically the spoils of war against some enemy. And we can actually make out which enemy this was, because next to the captured arms, we have carnixes, some battle trumpets played by the Celts that lived to the north of the Roman territory. This is clearly a reference to victories the Romans won against Celtic tribes up at the north of the Italian peninsula, some years before these coins were struck. Next, let's check out this denarius with this really unusual shape. Notice this little, it's almost like a little bottle cap, you know? These are the so-called serrated denarius, serrati denarius, because it has these serrated edges. This was a trend on silver coins around the turn of the 1st century BC, and we still don't know why they did it. Some argue it was an anti-counterfeiting measure, which didn't seem to work that well because we find plated copies of serrated coins, or that it was simply a cosmetic decision to make the coins stand out. This particular example is from the year 106 BC, struck under the authority of Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiagenus, or Asiaticus. And if the name sounds similar to you, Scipio, it's because this man was indeed from the family of the legendary Scipio Africanus. To be more precise, he was the great-grandson of Scipio Africanus' brother, Although Lucius here would eventually become a consul, sadly this particular Scipio here wasn't as successful. On the obverse of this coin we have the laureate head of a surprisingly young-looking Jupiter, very unique. After all, he was the king of the gods, he was generally depicted as an older, wiser man. Notice his relatively short beard in this example. We are entering the late Republican period, a time with plenty of civil wars and internal instability, so the image of Jupiter will be commonly used to reinforce this idea of order and authority. Looking at the reverse, we have once again Jupiter, but this time he's riding his quadriga, his 4-horse chariot. He's holding on one hand a scepter, and on the other he holds his thunderbolt, ready to strike. Under the design, the moneyer's name, Lucius Scipio Asiagenus. Sadly, this Scipio here didn't have it easy. He fought in the bloody social war when Rome fought its Italic allies, and in an embarrassing episode for Lucius, he had to flee from a rebel army dressed as a slave. Later, he was abandoned by his troops in Sulla's civil wars, but miraculously he managed to survive after all, and to live the rest of his life in the city of Massalia. But first he was exiled from Rome and had all of his possessions in the city confiscated. Alright, let's keep going. Let's go to the year 86 BC. That's another very interesting denarius, although it is an anonymous coin, that is, there are no inscriptions on the piece itself naming moneyers. We actually know the name of the 3 triumvir monetales of that particular year: Caius Gargonius, Olgulnius, and Marcus Vergilius. This type of denarius is particularly common. Rome was embroiled in total war against Mithridates VI. They needed a lot of coins issued to pay for the troops that went to the east to fight him, and this is a really cool example to show us how denarii weren't always made in fixed quantities. When war came, the state expenditure absolutely skyrocketed, and coins from these times tend to be more common simply by the sheer number that were made in the first place. On the obverse, we have this very elegant bust of Apollo, wearing a crown made out of wheat stalks. Notice on his cheek we have this little mark, right? This little, pinch. That's most likely a banker's mark. At some point, this denarius must have been deposited at the Roman version of a bank, although the comparison with modern banks isn't exactly precise. But anyways, they had banks, and this mark serves to prove that this coin was checked by a banker for its purity, for its weight, for its quality, and marked as a good coin. On the reverse, we once more have the image of Jupiter riding the quadriga. Let's keep going forward in time to the year 81 BC. So that was a tricky time. Sulla has taken control of Rome, gets elected dictator, and goes on a rampage, purging all of his political enemies. This year is, in my view, the introductory year of what I would call the imperatorial period, when Rome's real power would be in the hands of military generals, military strongmen, instead of the actual Senate. This particular coin was made under the moniker Gaius Marius Capito. Sadly, this man has nothing to do with the Gaius Marius, Sulla's enemy and reformer of the Roman legionary system. This coin is fascinating because its imagery passes a completely opposite message to what was truly happening in Rome at the time. Here we have Ceres, the goddess of harvest, beautifully rendered, wearing some long earrings and a crown made out of wheat stalks, very elegant. Ceres was quite a benign deity, so showing such a light-hearted goddess in a time of political repression is, on the very least, ironic. Some scholars argue this is a case of propaganda on the part of Sulla, showing that normality was back, people could tend to their fields, and the supply of food was normalized, which seems like a reasonable proposition. After all, like a strong man passing his message on coins, it's basically what he wants, right? And around the bust of Ceres, the legends read, Caius Filius Capito Triumvir, making a reference to the moneyer. The reverse complements the obverse. We have a man plowing a field with 2 oxen. There are 2 interesting interpretations to this reverse. Once more, both related to Sulla and his troops. When the Romans founded a new colony, they would conduct this ceremony, where a priest would plow the initial grid where the city would be built upon. So this coin could be a reference to colonies founded by Sulla on his campaign against Mithridates some years prior. Another interesting interpretation, much more reasonable and more likely to be the real one in my opinion, as it would be a politically savvy move, says that these coins were issued to pay for Sulla's troops that helped him take Italy. He promised to give these soldiers lands in Italy, so the image on the reverse might very well be a message to Sulla, from Sulla to his troops, saying, "I will give you the lands I promised. Look, I even put my promise on the coins so everyone can see it." This type of public statement of promise was very important for a Roman, and breaking such public promises could very quickly get you killed. Some later issues of this piece bear the mark SC on the reverse, meaning Senatus Consulto. This means that they come from an extraordinary batch of coins. The normal issues of coins that was approved for that particular year was not enough to pay for all of the troops that were raised. So these letters mark that the Senate had to gather and approve an extra batch of silver extracted from the state treasury. So it's so interesting to see how the issue of these coins was pretty well controlled, and we can distinguish coins from the normal issue, which my coin is an example of, and the special later issue with the mark SC. And for the last coin of the day, and in my opinion one of the most exciting ones, this coin comes from the very eventful year 49 BC, the year Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon and the first great Roman Republican Civil War commenced. Vast quantities of this coin type, issued under the moneyer Manius Ancilius Glabrio, must have been inside the Roman treasury, called the Aerarium, when Caesar entered Rome. He seized a whopping 7.5 million denarii from the treasury, and this very same coin could have been in that treasure. On the obverse, we have the image of Salus, the goddess of health, of well-being. The moneyer responsible for this issue seems to have been a partisan of the Pompeian faction, and he chose Salus to commemorate that Pompey's recovery after a serious illness. Salus is shown wearing a laurel wreath, and she wears some really nice earrings too. On the reverse, we have an uncommon goddess, Valetudo, the Roman interpretation of the Greek Hygeia, a goddess that also represents health, but mostly she was related to the idea of cleanliness. She was a daughter of the great Asclepius, the god of medicine, and in case you haven't made the connection already, Hygeia, that's where our word hygiene comes from, Hygeia. She's standing, leaning over a little column. She holds a snake on her hand. The choice for this reverse is likely a complementary design to the obverse, so it's overall like a recovery, a health-related coin. The legends read, Manlius Ancilius Triumvir, and then the goddess's name, Valetudo. Such a lovely coin with a ton of history behind it. As you can see, Roman Republican coins are incredible. Each piece has a completely unique history attached to it, related to what was going on in Roman politics at the time it was struck. Although my main collecting focus are Roman imperial coins, I have to admit, Republican coins do a much better job at being actual propaganda pieces in coin form. They aren't just a claim of sovereignty from the emperor. They reflect a precise moment in time. They often show political biases towards a certain faction, making them very unique visually and a wonderful source of information from the time period they were made. So, have you got a Roman Republican coin? Let us know in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon.